Vince, hi. Good to see you.
Hi, Chris.
So your role, firstly, introducing who you are.
Yes. Well, I'm a non-exec director now, semi-retired, working for Litmus Partnership, helping them grow as a business. My previous role, which ended in probably more like a year ago, was as chairman of Waterfall Group. So that was my last sort of full-time role. Waterfall was a independently owned contract catering, care and education. And then we did a joint venture, was acquired and did a joint venture with Elior in 2016 to 2019. So my last role in contract catering was as chairman of Waterfall, and I'm currently semi-retired.
And it's worth saying, because actually your career won't be known to people, you were originally in the army, then corporate life.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I started university degree in hotel and catering at Surrey, sponsored by the Army, short service commission in the Army catering, which was great fun. Then decided to take up a commercial role, and in fact worked for a small contractor in Kent, and then that was bought by a company called Pall Mall, and then actually a certain gentleman called Mr. Shepherdson came knocking for a role running Sodexo UK, which was based in Glasgow, and that was about 9 months before Gardner Merchant and Sodexo came together in a sort of worldwide merger to create sort of a large contract caterer. And obviously in the UK, a very big business. So I became embedded in Gardner Merchant. Sodexo took on the healthcare business and then ultimately took on education, defence, private finance, and went on the board in 1999, which was, a fabulous time.
And it's also worth saying you've written a book as well.
I did, yes. Well, I sort of went off the corporate world, had a bit of a change. I went to Australia and got involved in a project there on PFIs with a consortium, and that worked for about 6 or 8 months, and then it finished. And so I had a bit of spare time and wrote a bit of a fun novel, which was quite fun. And then ultimately, when I came back from Australia to the UK, that's when we started the Waterfall business.
So what would you describe as being your biggest learning in your career?
I think it probably came about as there's lots of things you learn, but thinking through what was the biggest, I would say creating the right culture in an organisation for people to flourish. And we certainly did that, in my view, within Waterfall, Taylor Shore, Cater Plus. And we had certain values, one of which was tell it as it is. So we encouraged people to speak up. We encouraged people to be very open and honest. And that really helped, I believe, people be themselves. I think quite often in corporate world, you kept quiet, you sort of hid beneath things, and maybe didn't take chances, and maybe afraid to make mistakes and so on. So yes, I would say that was my major learning, and it was a very exciting period, very, very motivating, I think, for all the people around us, and hence the reason I think we had such great success.
And who's been the greatest influence on you? Who's inspired you as a leader and influenced your own thinking?
Yeah, when you pose this question, I stopped and I've struggled to pick one person out. I would say that I've learned things from a variety of people. My colour sergeant at Sandhurst was very influential, and then a chap called Tom Pearce in Tap Catering was also very helpful to me. Probably the one I remember being most motivated about and inspired by was actually Gary Hawkes, when the two businesses came together. I think probably he had, half an eye on his sort of semi-retirement, but I found him very inspiring, very charismatic, and great communicator. And subsequently, that period in Gardner Merchant, there were a lot of diverse characters, a lot of people that you learned a lot from. But I'd probably single him out as someone who had that ability to motivate you. But I can't say there's a leader that I've looked at or books that I've read that kind of inspires me that I could single out.
And in terms of your own successes and failures?
Well, I think you are defined very heavily by your failures and how you recover from those. For me, going off the corporate roundabout, going to Australia, whilst it was a great experience, it ended up being very difficult. I had a business over there which I didn't really know much about, and that didn't work. I came back to the UK and invested in a business, a small contract catering, without doing due diligence. And so in 2006, I was actually pretty much broke. I borrowed quite a lot of money off my parents, and again, the investment in Cater Plus with private equity backing was a real sort of watershed moment. So those failures, I would say, really created an impetus to really, then drive forward. And fortunately, I would say that the reverse side of that is the waterfall growth, going from 8 million to 80 odd million in around about 8 years was the big success story to date of my life.
That was great. Can you tell me a story about something that's really changed your life or influenced your life? Something personal about, or really shaped the way you think about things?
Yeah, I think I got introduced to a guy in the sort of Pall Mall days, with who I subsequently worked with when I first went up to Sodexo in '94. There's a chap called John Thompson, and he had a company called Beechwood, and he introduced a training concept, and it was based around a mat. So there were 48 squares, and you could only navigate your way through this mat one route. And it was a very clever tool. But what was really interesting was that when you worked it with teams, it enabled you to bring out lots of things about how you communicate, concept of it's okay to make a mistake, and just generally the way that this guy brought in this training tool to then enable you to road test working as an effective team was just brilliant. And that was a really powerful period where you benefited from somebody from the outside coming in and helping you build successful teams.
What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Difficult. That's very difficult, because I guess you don't want to take the fun out of the 18-year-old that certainly I was when I first went to Surrey University in 1977, had a lot of fun. But I think probably the biggest thing I would say is listen more. I do think that probably, and even now at 61, there's occasions where I don't listen enough. So I think looking back, I'd probably say to that 18-year-old, enjoy yourself, enjoy the moment, but do listen a lot more than diving in and giving your opinion.
Thanks, Vince. That's perfect.